Welcome to the most boring talk at GCAP, called Know Your Audience. We're going to start on a really positive note. And it hasn't been getting better for a long time. And it's not an opinion. It's essentially a statistical fact. So I'm going to get to the whole introduction later, but the company I work at, we do a lot of market and analytics-based research. So everything here is done with relevant hypothesis tests, data cleaning and stuff. Just assume that someone knows what they're doing and they put the chart up there. Credit goes to Mia Pham, data scientist at the company. Anyway, more games are releasing every year. We are selling less games. Games are getting less reviews. And year on year, the rate of these are increasing. So more games, less. And whether you're an indie or single A, triple A, it's a universal occurrence across the entire market. It's saturated, competitive, really risky. There's also 47,000 developers on Steam, so there's a lot of you. Players also are becoming more discerning. So over the last, 10 years, 2010, I can't count. There is a strong, increasingly negative trend of review ratios. Players are just becoming more critical and you have less chance to make mistakes. They're also spending less time on their collection of games. They're not spending less time on gaming, they're spending less time per game. They're more fickle and they're more critical and they are much more prone to moving on. Pricing of games has also not just stagnated, but if you adjust for inflation, they're paying less money for games. So there are games, especially in the AAA range, that are creeping upwards in their median pricing, adjusted for inflation. But in the indie market especially, because of the it's a theory, but because of saturation and the competitiveness, one of the ways that people try and differentiate themselves is competing on price. So things are not looking good. And we all know that whole thing of if your game is below 80% in its review ratio, if it goes to positive or mixed, it's like a death sentence. Most of you are not going to hit that when you release your games. Maybe, I don't know, like the sample. But you have an 18% chance of hitting that based on all the games that we've looked at. Publishers are not doing better either. There are 4,000 publishers on Steam accounting for publishers that have released games that they have not developed multiple times. Publishers who, some of them may not be active or be very infrequent. However, the same phenomenon exists across the board for publishers, the same as developers. And 75% of the publishers across all of their games have a median review count of 37, which is horrifying. Every key metric of how we've, gauge opportunity in games is going down. So basically, whether or not you have high wish lists, low wish lists, you have a lot of community followers, low community followers, everything is going downwards at the moment per game. And I guess what's going on? So, that was the wrong slide actually, but this is the one that should scare people. So the whole thing about, make sure your game gets X amount of wish lists or X amount of community followers, as generalized advice. All of these predictors are becoming less and less reliable. And out of all of those publishers that we looked at, only a very few of them with very specific types of games have statistically significant support for wish lists having a relationship with total review count or estimated copies sold. And basically, if these predictors worked, we wouldn't be here in the state that we are in right now. But some people are quite lucky, right? So even though everything looks horrible and sad, within all of this gloom and all of this kind of horror that you just witnessed, great start to the day, there are a fair few publishers and developers that apparently are always seemingly quite lucky. And we can all think of names, right? I'll give you one, like Coffee Stain, right? Always publishing $1 million hits, or Hooded Horse, or there are publishers as well as developers who apparently can always make lightning in a bottle. And we make assumptions like, it's brute force in marketing spend, it's, their Twitter followers or this or that, like theories. And as game developers, people in the room here especially, and it does include publishers, for those of you that may be in here and may have snuck in, that we get bombarded with so much different advice and explanations and what to do to be like the lucky foo, if that makes sense. From game ideation to pitching, pre-release preparation, all of this stuff, even post-release like monetization, you're getting told to do a lot of things and sometimes they're conflicting. And we're going to break that advice down because we read a few hundred of those articles and kind of like did a whole little frequency chart and figured out what the most common kind of things, advice being told were. It's both the topic of this talk, but it's also the root of everything that is good and bad in the state of things at the moment. And I'm going to probably start with the question of who's been told to research their target market as a way of preparing to pitch a game or designing a game. Oh, that's sad. That's a lot of people. Okay. Does any of this stuff look familiar to anyone here? Cool. Yeah. I am so sorry. So, out of all the articles, none of them, they all say this stuff, but none of them really drill down into why you do this. They tell you to do it. They tell you that successful games do it. They, hint at ways of doing it. But no one actually told you why. No one sits down and says, so define your target market. Why? Why do you define your target market? What's that going to get you? And I'm sure you've all seen this when you're preparing your, your slide decks, your GDDs, or your pitch to somebody with money or internally, or you're preparing for post-release and all of this stuff. So we're told to define our market and our audience, and we get to see all these little reports. I know all of you have typed into Google, a genre, trends, and then posted a statistical report. So say you want to make a strategy game. Cool. All right, like here's a bunch of charts talking about the strategy game market. All of them are wrong. Because the logic of grouping markets into big genre monoliths and then creating trend prediction is slightly faulty, and we're going to explain why. So we did a man-kindle test of all games by top-level genres from 2010 to 2023, and every single one of them is showing a trend of decreasing year on year. So by that logic, making a tabletop game, action, adventure, RPG, strategy game is a bad idea. They're all decreasing year on year. So you should just all make casual games, all of you. And I kind of think that's what happened, right? So let's have a look at these monoliths. This is, some of you may have attended FreeCon, will know where this is from, but this is the depth of those reports at this current format. This is how you end up with a situation where people say, strategy players love fast-paced, competitive online stuff. Strategy players overlap with action players. Strategy players overlap with shooters players. If someone can explain to me how Counter-Strike and Manor Lords are the same strategy kind of like genre archetype, congratulations. Genre monolith market research is just not going to help you. Because what are you going to learn from making the next Stellaris or the next Age of Empires by looking at the design of Counter-Strike or its audiences, or looking at Dead by Daylight, a well-known strategy game? Because there's 176 different groups of primary genre combinations where there are more than 100 games per group with no overlap. This blows up into thousands, and then it blows up into more when we factor in secondary and subgenres, and then also sliced by themes, single player, multiplayer. Keep in mind that I've seen all of your pitch decks. You put 5 competitor titles as your similar references. Even among the group, like these really well-defined groups, we see 100, 200, 300 games. There are 9,535, did I get that right? Oh yeah, games tagged as action. So that's just action in primary genre. Action adventure with the unique games, no overlap, 7,000, blah, blah, blah. And we can actually see, in a associate, like based on association rules, I'm not going to get too nerdy with it, but scientifically we can see how different games and genres, subgenres split and have common associations. So, like when we say like strategy games, what we actually can mean is grand strategy, RTS games, turn-based games, city builder games, simulation strategy games. There are no monoliths based on primary genres. Your target market, when you're trying to define it, is a lot more precise than just action or strategy. And there's a reason for that. But maybe some of you are saying, no, Emre, you're dumb. You don't know what you're doing. You can't count. I'm going to arrange my market based on primary genres. Cool. So across every single primary genre, we can see like estimated copies sold ranges that can mean that you're either going to be in a lot of trouble or you'll be buying Lamborghinis for everyone on your team. Like, who knows, right? Same phenomenon for secondary genres or third or subgenres. They are so wide in what you might hit. There's genuinely no point putting that in any type of like research in your game. You might make 0 or Jeff Bezos money. Who knows? Even when we narrow that sample of similar competitors down to 200, and the way that we do it is slightly more sophisticated than throwing darts on a wall, the ranges are still really difficult to work with. The difference between a studio selling 500,000 copies and 3.2 million copies is life-changing in the trajectory of that studio, that business, that game. And even if you do it super, super well, the ranges are still so wild that it kind of boils down to one question, is that how does knowing those ranges or knowing these facts actually help you to make a video game? And this is all going back to like, identify your market size and things like that. Because one type of analysis says strategy games are dying, and the other type of analysis is looking at basically saying the opposite. So strategy games are experiencing the greatest loss of estimated copies sold year on year in one type of analysis, in the proportion of games released year on year. But if you look at it from the perspective of the rate of loss of median copies sold, it's one of the least, dropping down. So kind of butchered that one. Basically, I don't know, make a strategy game, don't make a strategy game. It could be successful, not successful. I've got evidence to say it's going to go either way, both. And it kind of leads, like genre monoliths leads to something that we see a lot, which is player personas, identify your target player demographics. And the most, we see this all the time. Steve is over 30, loves action games. Which of the 9,000 action games does Steve like? We don't know. Emma loves strategy games. Does Emma love Counter-Strike? Does Emma love Satisfactory? No idea. So we don't have the level of resolution in which we can have the level of, prejudice or generalization of these demographics based on genre monoliths. Because, it's garbage both ways, really. It doesn't help you to make assumptions about your players just as much as it wouldn't make sense or help you to make assumptions about primary genres acting as a monolith when this is, the way that this information is being collected historically. So we've torn everything down, and what the hell is this talk even about? So, I work for a company called Guild, and I'm not going to do a bit of any of the self-promotion. We get money for video games, and we evaluate video games for funding, for the publishers or platforms and things like that. And I'm not going to talk about my personal experience or my preference of games or my tenure in the industry or anything like that, because I kind of feel like my metric of success today is going to be based on whether or not you get restless about wanting to go back and work on your game, your pitches, your game design. And a lot of it's going to make sense by the end of this talk. And if not, I'm sorry, but yeah, I'm sick, so I got to pass. So this is going to be controversial, but I promise you that hopefully we're going to stick the landing. If you're making a video game and you're charging money for it, you're building a product. irregardless of whether or not you feel it is artistic expression, by definition you have customers and you're giving them a product. Your customers, they have needs, and there's a reason why they purchase products to fulfill those needs. So we are going to steer this in a direction where by the end of it, the most esoteric games, most creative games that have been successful are actually really well designed products. And it doesn't cheapen their significance. It actually pays the due and necessary respect to the people that have made them and the intent and the deliberate nature in how they've made them, rather than them just being, lucky. So, I guess, let's do hands. Who's heard of this one before? Great, this quite never happened. This is fake. So, another dream burst. Basically, we're going to deconstruct this because I know this has been said so many times and people interpret it in a way of saying, people don't know what they want, so I'm going to surprise them with what they want, and I'm going to, show them what they need, and it's going to be amazing. I'm Steve Jobs. Basically, these hypothetical customers from this fake quote were not buying horses because they like horses. Horses smell. They want to get from A to B. They want to move goods from A to B. And horses were a particularly convenient way of doing that as opposed to walking, which sucks. So someone somewhere figured out how to jump on a horse and not die, and they made the horse go in the direction they wanted to go. And then someone said, well, here's a wheel. Let's put a cart on a horse. Incredible. When we ask players what they want, they can only conceptualize the extension of what has addressed their needs historically. So when you say, well, what do you want in a real-time strategy game, they can only think of Age of Empires. We don't ask people what they want, we ask what they need, because the limitations of what they want is based on what they've seen before. And how they know that what will address their needs or what their purchasing decisions is based on the games they've seen before. For some people, there might be like a little light bulb thing of going, I can kind of see where this is going. For everyone else, we are going to get there. So, there's a theory in marketing analytics. It's by Kotler. I can never pronounce that name. However, there's variations of 3-layer and 5-layer product theory. And we're going to focus on the 3 to keep it simple. There's a need, and a product exists to fulfill that need. And the way that product is purchased and differentiated is based on the want. And these will sound like dirty words and like, corporate shill words, but they're actually quite sincere and genuine into how we do games that actually make people happy. The first of the layers is the core. So going from A to B, your customers, audiences, players, everyone has a core need. There's a reason why we buy the games that we buy. There's a reason why we buy the clothes that we buy or the cars that we buy. I don't want to own a car just for the sake of it. It gets me from A to B, and it has features or differentiators that help. So these are expectations that when I buy a car, it's going to have 4 wheels and it's going to have an engine, hopefully a door and a windscreen. And if not, then that could be a problem. The games that we build at its core, or the product, is a tangible delivery of what those needs are. It is basically a promise of that we're going to fulfill those requirements. So when I buy a car, I expect at the very base that it's going to have 4 wheels and engine. It's going to have the doors and the windscreen. If you don't know what a car is, then when I buy a horse, 4 legs and a head. And a saddle, hopefully. So we don't buy these things because we think they're awesome. They are there to actually help us with our needs. Augmentations basically is how something that appears in front of us is able to fulfill, like the product, can fulfill that need in a way that we didn't actually think about before. So augmentations can be an electric car. We didn't know that an electric car could exist when we saw the combustion engine until someone said, well, what about electric? There are other forms of it. And, as in these, the phenomenon I just, mentioned earlier about the median price drop, augmentations can be discounts. They can be bundles. They can be things that are easy to perform in order to convince someone that, yes, this is a great cozy game that you should buy, and it's cheaper than your competitors are, so you should buy it. And the core of any game, or let's say, how does this actually make sense to video games? We don't buy video games because we want to own video games. Video games essentially give us the promise of an experience based on its similarity to the games that we've played in the past. So if I buy, let's say, I don't know, what's a good, like Age of Empires, I played Warcraft, I have expectations coming in that, there's a lot of things that look similar to me. Or if I'm buying, action shooter strategy game with big burly dudes, number 7, then Gears of War was my reference point. So when we buy these games, it is pretty much the same as how you make purchasing decisions when you're out in the real world, where you remember how something similar fulfilled your needs and made you happy, and it was a good decision, and then this one looks similar, and maybe it's adding something extra, and that's cool. So when I want to buy a new stealth adventure game, like my mind goes back to things like Dishonored or Metal Gear Solid or whatnot, because I expect that it's going to make me feel like a stealthy little raccoon, and it's going to satisfy my needs. That's great. This is also where many people go to die, especially studios. This core represents all of those times when you've had never-ending design meetings and been locked into trying to be revolutionary. You have images of winning a BAFTA, all this stuff about subverting expectations and genres. You cannot dictate to someone what they need. You can't subvert someone's expectations of them giving you money and what you're giving them is going to address a need, and then saying, hey, surprise, there is no car. It's a lesson in why cars are bad, because that's just an EV with extra steps and more disappointment. So many projects are going to languish in development hell, and many others will release to their players and will not be able to understand why something really simple or a very little feature or mechanic has translated to some sort of review bombing. So if you sell me a stealth game and you're going to subvert what the idea of being stealth is, then I think we're just going to have a problem. And we see this all the time in a lot of these games. So the tangible layer, sorry, I'm just going to have some water, is basically like if you're making an RTS, you have to have good unit pathfinding, you have to have good camera controls, you have to have X and Y. Like there are things that are expected by players over the decades that we've had games where they have become a staple of what, the archetype of that game. So games as products, they are composed of content, mechanics, quality, art, audio, narrative. All of these are varying degrees of importance based on the archetype of game. There are games where audio and music is incredibly, will kill or thrive a game. There are games where cinematics are super important, and there are games when it's not. And these kind of core requirements are the bare minimum that you need to accomplish in order to make someone feel like they're happy that they bought their game. And every single game or archetype of game, like subgenres and whatever, will have different weights of these, and this is why genre monoliths are so dangerous. So if I'm making like a stealthy game, I expect it's going to have enemy detection, it's going to have cooldown states, patrol routes, it's going to have distractions, gadgets. Keep that in your mind, it's going to make sense later. But the game features are mandatory, they are non-negotiable, your players expect them, and if you compromise on them, you are breaking a promise to your players. If I am playing your stealthy game and I don't have what I expect to feel stealthy, I don't even think to me, it's a stealth game. It's a bad stealth game. I don't care about all the other stuff that gets put into it because you lied to me about why I should buy your game. Many of you will make the mistake of thinking that these minimum requirements are unique selling points. Like you will make a stealth game and say, the enemies can detect you. And congratulations, it's like you figured that one out. But augmentations is about how do enemies detect you in a way that I have never experienced before? How do I feel stealthy in your game in a way that I have never actually thought was possible? This is where art and creativity, innovation, and that lightning in a bottle is manufactured. And I say manufactured because it's not based on luck. And the way that we've ascribed it to luck and randomness has discredited a lot of really incredible especially indie game designers. Like any game you can think of, especially with like the most esoteric ones, if you were to strip that down into its white box and its mechanics, you can make a checklist of them actually hitting all of the minimum requirements and then innovating on the delivery of those things. This is how we present the promise of meeting the player's expectations in a way that they never thought was possible. And this is where if you pitch me a stealth game, but it was delivered through the lens of a city builder, and I have to play as a mice in the wall and I'm building a town, but I got to make sure that we don't make too much noise, there's cats outside, there's people outside. And like, even that feels good to say, right? That is a self-writing elevator pitch. But we know that when we say that, we already understand this, like the core requirements of these things, of saying, oh, we have to have detection, we have to have cooldown states, we have to have, you know, the people in the kitchen making food and schedules and patrol routes. It's just a stealth game, but let's make it into a city builder instead. So great games are very, very good at surprising us in how they meet our needs and making us want them. So when we say define your market, this is actually what we mean. And when we say, you know, research your audience, I'm not telling you to go out and make assumptions of big demographics of people that you've never met and what their preferences are. It is about understanding what a very specific group of people care about in the games that they play. What are their needs? What are their expectations? And this is why, you know, we research the games. Playing games is not a form of research. Research is intentional, it is defined, and the saying that I always say to people is, and we can do a little poll here, how many people here drive a car? Cool. How many people here know how to build a car? Cool. So, how do we simplify this? It's not easy to try and guess what people want, because we, especially those of us who are neurospicy, have struggles with that. But there is a logic behind it. So it is iterative. But it starts with an idea. So all of your games have ideas, absolutely. But you shouldn't be borrowing X from Y and, you know, from X or whatever, from these, like, you know, Frankenstein of ideas. Every single game needs a base, and it has a core, it has a grounding in it. It's a fundamental experience in how it delivers what somebody needs, and basically satisfies it to generate want. And many of our traditional genres and traditional ideas of games existed in this format. So these little things, real-time strategy, great. What if real-time strategy, but we make it hero-focused? And then we do, like, you know, a lot of content. It's party-based, it's fast, there's a lot of abilities. Did it survive? Yeah, cool, it did. It's a MOBA, that's great. For, you know, Dota to Warcraft 3, there was Counter-Strike to Half-Life. These things are not kind of just like, you know, happening at randomness. There is a very deliberate, traceable pattern of how, especially mods, build on core requirements and then experiment and find the fun in delivering something in an unexpected way. And they can fail fast. They can basically, you know, de-risk really quickly, but you're not going to go out and rebuild the entire Warcraft 3 RTS engine to go build Dota, because that's not what happened. They were able to take things that were safe in terms of audience core requirements and then experiment on how do we change, you know, how do we change the delivery mechanism? How do we test to see if people want this or not? And where there are their subdivisions and when they thrive, they form their new genres. So from there, we say, well, what if MOBA, but first person, and it's shooter? And we are going to simplify the whole leveling thing. And then, yeah, we end up with this. So these are not linear trends. As they become popular and they are replicated by competitors, they become generic. So the expectations of those trends become just normal expectations of the bare minimum you need for a hero shooter. Games did not fail based on culture wars. They fail based on not being able to push further than the generic expectations of players. You know, those narratives drive me crazy because we are just failing to see this whole idea that if I, you know, release an Adidas shoe that is Dadas and it's basically the same shoe, of course it's not going to sell. It's a generic product, unless it's cheaper or, you know, it's free. So when these things become normalized, that's when we start experimenting again. and we start looking at innovating on delivery again. And then when it sticks, it settles to become its own subgenre. And then, now we can't imagine a world where 40 people wouldn't drop into a map and shoot each other on a shrinking radius. But 10 years ago, that just seemed weird. So these things normalize. But now you have expectations of a battle royale or a hero shooter or a 4X space game. And then once those things settle, then all of you as developers, when you're competing in those market spaces, you need, those are the minimum expectations. This is where, this is exactly the point in which people were telling you to find the fun and to prototype quickly and to fail fast. Does the delivery stick? Does it make sense? Does it make people want it? Rather than trying to figure out where the core of the game even was. So how do we do this? And if you feel stuck, I've got good news, because we're going to replicate the whole way that we do it in a kind of macro scale at home. So this is where the whole competitor analysis comes into play. No one in the publishing industry believes you when you say that your game is similar to Assassin's Creed and The Division and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't, that was not what we were saying with competitor analysis. Your sales estimates aren't correct. You're not going to sell 5 million copies because your sampling is biased, for starters. Competitor analysis is about you triangulating the games that are similar to your game and then being able to drill down to the people that play those games and understanding what made those games successful and what the minimum requirements were for you to compete within that triangulated little space. It's about understanding your references and your inspirations and to figure out how they addressed what people needed and why did people want to play them. So the way you can do that, we do it at 200 kind of games per game, but grab a few games. Let's say 30 to be safe. And then from those, grab all their attributes. Hot tip, do not look at the review numbers or any performance metrics, because all of you always pick the most successful for your similar game sample, and you forget that there's 90 other games that didn't survive that were exactly like your game. So just be genuine and honest to yourself, pick out all their attributes, and then find the overlapping ones across all of them. So, is all of them saying choices matter? Or music or audio was really important. So from there, you start to understand what actually players felt were necessary, what they expected, what stuck, what did well, and what wasn't that important. So, this goes so deep that I can tell you that if you're making an ARPG game with isometric controls and it's a hack and slash roguelike, that your store page description length has a statistically significant relationship with your total review count. That's how deep this whole thing goes. But all you need to do really is to do sincere and honest competitor analysis, figure out what kind of mechanics and features or attributes are overlapping amongst those games, and you start to see the core form and the minimum requirements form. So this is exactly the way that we do it, right? We find 200, 400, 500, but if you get 30, you start to break down these features, make lists of what did they do? Did they have multiplayer? Did they have a grand strategy layer? Did they have 10 guns? Did they have gun customization? Did they have outfit customization? Find games that are similar in their core to yours, and then you start learning from that. And put it in a spreadsheet, do a frequency count, find those commonalities, and this is where you figure out where your game actually fits. And it's about now you understand what type of audiences you're actually addressing and what they care about. So requirements gathering with audiences is not making fake profiles of astronauts and Steve and whatnot, or making assumptions about demographics that you would never make in real life to someone's face. The way we do it is actually slightly bigger, but because we read every single review of every game, but you can do this too at home. So let's say you've got your list of games, 30 games. You've got your big list of features and mechanics and attributes that people are counting. Now, start reading those reviews and start putting little marks or whatever you need to do to start looking at what worked well, what didn't work well. Keep doing this, right? Because you're going to start seeing three really important things happening. What are the minimum requirements that you need to successfully compete amongst those similar games? What did your competitors do really well? What are you expected to do as well? And what did your competitors not do well? So where are your opportunities to innovate and to stand out? The example that I always give is that a horse poos and a car does not. That's a great selling point right there. So what they didn't do well is not something to, celebrate, because I know some of us, when we're frustrated, we like that. It is actually about opportunities where you don't need to, do a 50% discount or spend $1 million on marketing, but instead add features that people were complaining about. And it's so simple. So this big list that you've collected basically is your core requirements, and it's your opportunities to create ideas and innovate, and to compete, and to stand out, and to retain your players, and to, seemingly randomly hit lightning in a bottle. But this opportunity to innovate is also exactly where you will go find your BAFTAs or your acclaims. You will have a community of people that love your game, because you're not subverting someone's expectations of going from A to B. You're saying, here's a car, and it will get you from A to B faster. And we all now remember Henry Ford. I don't remember the guy who subverted my expectations of going from A to B. So creativity thrives here. It thrives in how we give people what they need in a way that they never thought was possible. For those of you that are skeptical, because I know there will be, let's get crazy. So, we scraped 1.2 million game development tweets over 2 years. Among them, we saw patterns, and I have watched all of you tweet about your games for a really long time. We collected all the screenshots from Screenshot Saturday. We've collected everyone asking for, like and retweet, share your game. Those of you, talking to famous game developers, trying to build networks, we classified all of them. We trained models on them. We dissected them. We investigated all of them. And we're going to show you something special. So, a lot of the generic advice about, tweet at this time of day, tweet at this day, tweet at this month, week, in this format, doesn't really have the grounding of statistical evidence that you would assume that it should when it's so authoritative. We watched all the hashtags for years, and none of it really correlates to the ingredients of virality. So the median amount of likes across all 1.2 million tweets was 14. The mean is 98, but all of you tweet a lot in general, like a lot. So we couldn't find any support for best days, hours, or any of the generic advice across any of these kind of relationships. Most, not all, but most of the indie marketing advice did not really present itself within the sample that we were working with. We couldn't find them as predictors. So, tweet whenever, at whatever time, sure. There were starting to see like little glimpses. So if you have a movie or a GIF, you're on average more likely to get 52 more likes or something like that. And 9 more retweets than not. So what's driving all of this? Basically, we don't know, so we labeled 200,000 tweets by hand. And it sucked, and it was a really bad week. So we categorized the data, and we classified it based on, content, genres, art styles. We cross-trained from the games from Steam and did a bunch of semantic analysis and computer vision stuff, because we wanted to figure out what was actually happening. What's going on here? What is driving the machine? And we started mapping out account patterns, engagement patterns, content patterns. We kept trying to understand this. How is it possible that we have 80-something studios that can tweet exactly the same thing all the time and multiply that by 100,000, tens of thousands of tweets saying the same thing over and over again, trying to build engagement, following good indie advice about how to build your network. Share my game, here's a little update, look at my funny bug, here's some memes, here's a character backlore, like introduction, whatever. It was just noise, just like same noise. And more often than not, none of those accounts are to blame. They are emulating what they think is successful in a very generic, monolithic way. Then we noticed something interesting. 46 tweets, 214,000 likes amongst them. That's weird. So they were tweeting, like, these include things like how-to on an art guide, or a tutorial on how to make a character, or a meme, you know, or something about cute, like, you know, oh, here's a funny bug. Some of the accounts had 8 tweets in total and 10,000 likes average. Some of them had 40 and 500,000 likes in total. And then we started figuring it out. I think we all know Tiny Glade, I imagine. Back in the day when we were watching this, 44 tweets is what some of you tweet in a day. And this person's got 500,000 likes by that stage. Their fence dragging post killed it, right? And I think most of us remember that because most of us saw that as the first one. It wasn't about fence dragging because Manor Lord's fence dragging killed it too. Manor Lord's eroding parts killed it. That actually went really hard. So, you know, how would we have guessed that strategy fans who like Counter-Strike also like eroding parts and they really care about it? Across the entire million or so tweets, we noticed one really specific thing, which is that top performing, on average, game accounts are simply tweeting about how their game is going to address and satisfy the players' expectations in a way that the players had not seen before. They generate want and not traffic. They show people how their game is going to give them what they expect in ways that they had never thought about before, or in a way that feels satisfying. You know, that's a juicy fence drag. Or, ooh, like the details on those eroding parts, I want to buy that. It is so fundamental that all in the top, like, I guess, cohort of accounts, all these tweets, squirrel with a gun, you know, body cam, etc., like, honestly, all of them. Same thing, same concept. If you're making a racing game, people care about tire pressure, you know, influencing how you, turn the corner. I don't race cars, so I don't know if that's a real thing. But if you're making, you know, a game with guns or whatever, gun customization makes sense. If you're making an isometric, physics-driven character game, then, you know, bugs about you falling over or tripping over make sense. We all remember Dead Static Drive. When that tweet happened, I saw like 30,000 people with games in completely different genres trying to do the exact same thing. Doesn't make sense. But if you're making a similar type of game, then it starts to make sense. If you're making a horror game, people care about how the monster tracks and follows a player. That PT one, remember when they showed the debug version of the horror, like the evil monster, I hate horror games, was following the player the whole time. So these things actually matter at such a specific point to the audiences and the genres or subgenres that the monoliths are not working, the generic advice is not working, and I hope now you kind of understand why. And we're going to do one final point. So to illustrate this a little bit further, let's say about the stealth game that I really, really want. I want to be stealthy, I want to feel stealthy, I have expectations of being stealthy. This is a checklist of stealthy stuff that I expect from your game. We have guards, patrols, everything like that. Now, I want to be Kurt Russell from Escape from New York. I want to be an 80s action hero. Cool, we're out of time, almost. Yeah, cyborgs, commies with nuclear weapons. Wait, they weren't commies, they were something else, Universal Soldiers. Metal Gear Solid, fantastic, sold 10 million copies. Now, no Kurt Russell. I'm a goose, and I want to be a stealthy, menacing goose. And yeah, also 10 million copies, congratulations. But at the core, the same. At the core, they understand and they respect their players' needs and wants. And final recap is audience research is about understanding the needs of an audience. Competitor analysis is about understanding how other games have met those needs. Market research is about understanding where they went well and where they didn't, and you can. And art and creativity is about finding new and innovative ways to meet those needs in ways that were unexpected. And that's it, thank you. Yeah, I don't use social media, so that's it.
Now we'll have a little Q&A session. We have time for maybe 2 to 3 questions, so if you've got any questions for Emre, now's the time.
Cool. I'm very curious, you said you don't use social media, but everything that you do is research through social media. Do you want to expand on why that's the case?
I'm just really busy. I have accounts, but I have bots that watch stuff all the time. I mean, did you see the part with the 1.2 million tweets? Like, so we are watching, but I just don't have time, honestly. Like, yeah, I work as a lead engineer, so and because I'm here, like this is a good example where after this I have to go, do a stand-up call and things like that. So yeah, it's basically just that. It's time limitation. I don't know if that answers your question. Was there something more? No.
Thank you for the talk. One question is, how can you validate that you're correctly addressing players' needs and perhaps maybe innovating something on their wants before you spend years deep into your development?
That is, so that slide about saying people don't tell you why to do those advice, right? About why fail fast, why, prototype quickly, do this. That's it. Once you understand the core, slam 30 versions of, prototypes of, let's say, I don't know, are you making a game? What is the genre?
Vampire Survivors spin-off?
Cool. Do you know why Vampire Survivors was successful?
Just looking at their core of other games, seeing the excitement and trying to build on top of that.
Do you know what the most commonly cited reason why people hated Diablo 4 was? Mob density and a lack of a power curve. Do you know which game solved that problem? So basically research, understand those core, because none of this stuff, like the guy who made Vampire Survivors came from, he's a really good game designer that came from the gambling industry. It was never about luck or anything like that. He literally built a game that almost, I don't want to say cynically, but I guess for lack of a better term, just cynically just addressed what people hated about Diablo 4, and that's why we love Vampire Survivors. It's exactly the same thing, is that understand what they have failed at and struggled at and what was successful. If you're making a game like Vampire Survivors, I will guarantee you that your mob density has to be there. It has to be good. So prototype, it's cheap. Yep.
Thank you.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Cool.
Thank you for that. I think I'm really, your breakdown on defining the needs based on those player expectations is really, really interesting to me. But I guess, and I don't know if this is an answerable question, but I'm curious in your perspective of, given this games is an entertainment medium, like other entertainment mediums, it's not like another product that satisfies like a life need. So how do you interpret, or what is your perspective on the needs that games and entertainment fill for us?
Why are games and not a product?
Oh, they are a product. I don't disagree with
sorry.
that.
Yeah, I misunderstood. Sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, it's more about your perspective on games or entertainment generally as filling a need for us as humans.
Yeah.
Compared to I need to clothe myself because society requires me not to be naked or that kind of thing.
I mean, our need of experiences is, I think, fundamental. We want to be connected. We want to feel joy. We want to feel excitement. When we play video games, we also embody the characters or the avatars, or we essentially experience things that may not be accessible in the real world. They may give us confidence. They may give us acceptance. They may tell us it's okay, or they may test our mastery or our understanding. So I think it's a fundamental part of exactly why, why do we get haircuts? Because we want to look good, because it makes us feel good and confident. Games are not too far detached from those needs and wants. They are just another form of entertainment. I want to say another form of the way that we can commodify how to make someone feel and experience something that would otherwise be quite difficult to replicate, because we had theatre or we had communal storytelling. Now we can package something in a digital format and still have that kind of fundamental generational need for us to share experiences. And because we charge a price of admission for that, it does translate to a degree of customers. There is a promise and a mutual respect where, if you're giving me $20 and I give you a cozy game, but then I'm like, your idea of cozy is subverted because I think that the world is cruel. You're going to refund my game, and you're completely right to do that because you bought my game for the explicit reason that you wanted to buy something that was going to make you feel better about a rather not good world, or to connect with people and have social experiences. I have no idea if that answered your question, but I hope it kind of got close in the same ballpark.
It's a great perspective. Thank you for sharing that.
Cool.
Sorry, I saw one more hand up. Yeah, just one last one.
Hello, thank you for your talk. So I saw that you guys did a lot of research on Twitter and stuff like that, but did you guys also do any research on short form video content like TikTok and YouTube? And if you guys had, like, how did you guys get that data set? Like, did you watch a lot of videos?
Go to jail?
Yeah.
Yes, we did actually. We looked at quite a few things. The consistency is still there, and you'll notice it amongst short form video creators is that if you dissect their videos, they're genuinely just giving their audiences, whether it's a tutorial, whether it's like one of those like, oh, did you know about the fact of blah, 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 blah. And then the account's consistency remains quite the same. When they diverge, when they try to, kind of change things up is when they suddenly experience declines, is because they've shifted the way that they deliver expectations. So we look at a lot of stuff like that. We look at player reviews, we look at YouTube scripts, transcripts, YouTube comments, Reddit, video content, GIFs, so many GIFs. Short answer is yes.
Can I follow up?
Yeah.
So in terms of the content, would you say that more informative videos and stuff is better, or more kind of like meme-ified stuff is better?
Depends on what you're building. Always. There are games that are more successful with memes and less so with informative stuff. Like, I don't think Untitled Goose Game did like a character lore breakdown. But there are games where your players want that. Like, best example, like a counterexample, is if you're building a 4X game, Paradox's monthly or fortnightly blogs are read by thousands of people, and they're so dry and boring, and they go into like formulas and like, this number means this, and people love it, but not people that play Untitled Goose Game. So that is a good question, because the answer illustrates the final big point, is that it is extremely nuanced and dependent on the type of game that you're building. Yeah.
Thank you.
Alrighty. So that wraps up our Q&A for this session. If you have any more questions for Emre, please ask him outside.
Yep.
And can we also give him another round of applause, please?